Catherine Hale hurled the helicopter keys at Ethan Cole's feet, as if tossing away a piece of trash, and in that instant, the wind-swept rooftop of the Aerodyne Tower erupted with the mocking laughter of more than 20 executives standing in a curved formation around him. Everything happened so fast that no one registered the cruelty in Catherine's eyes. They only saw a janitor in a work uniform, his shoes dusted with cleaning residue, standing frozen beneath the cold blue sky that felt torn apart by ridicule. "Pick it up," Catherine said, her voice sharp, like a well-sharpened blade. "If you can fly this Sikorsky, I'll marry you on the spot." The crowd burst into louder laughter, their voices echoing across the bare rooftop of the Seattle skyscraper. Ethan bent down, his calloused fingers brushing the icy metal so lightly that no one heard the faint clink of the keys against his palm. But when he lifted his gaze, his eyes revealed something Catherine failed to notice: a lethal clarity, the kind of light found only in people who have stood on the edge between life and death more times than they can count. He said nothing, no reaction, no protest. His silence unsettled a few onlookers, but Catherine merely smirked, as if silence itself proved his inferiority. Behind the group, Brian Mercer, Aerodyne's chief financial officer, 46 years old, a man whose eyes always carried a hidden nervousness, stood with arms crossed, forcing a laugh to match everyone else, though the muscles in his face twitched with barely restrained tension. Brian glanced at the helicopter, then at Ethan, then at Catherine, with a confused expression, as if this scene had strayed far beyond the script he had planned. And Laura Stevens, the head of human resources, stood quietly near the rooftop door, her tired eyes reflecting something different, an awareness that Catherine's unconscious cruelty was pushing Aerodyne toward a point of no return. Ethan slipped the keys into his uniform pocket, the simple motion carrying an unspoken decision. A cold gust from Elliott Bay whipped across the rooftop, sliding down the back of his collar until it stung his skin. For a brief moment, he turned toward the Sikorsky S-76, its long blades and silver body gleaming so sharply it distorted his reflection into a warped silhouette. That helicopter had once symbolized Richard Hale Catherine's father, who died 6 months earlier in a suspicious crash. Now it had become a prop in his daughter's mockery. Catherine lifted her chin, her heels striking the concrete with crisp, decisive clicks. "Go clean the 12th floor." She flicked her hand, as if commanding someone beneath notice. Ethan did not reply. He simply turned toward the elevator. Yet something churned beneath his ribs, a fury compressed so tightly it bordered on absolute stillness. Not because of the humiliation he had endured far worse on the battlefields of Afghanistan, where one mistake nearly cost an innocent family their lives. He knew guilt. He knew the kind of torment that required sleeping pills just to silence the rotor noise that haunted his dreams. But what he saw today, what chilled his spine, was the frightening ease with which Catherine turned power into a weapon. She had no idea the aircraft had issues. She had no idea she was courting death. But Ethan knew. Because the eyes of a Night Stalker's pilot, a man who had flown hundreds of missions, could not be fooled by sounds or vibrations that others dismissed. As the elevator doors closed, the executive's laughter still rang faintly in his ears, but it no longer felt sharp. It faded into a distant echo from a life he no longer belonged to. What tightened in his chest was not shame, but the moment he realized something was dangerously wrong with that helicopter. And if no one intervened, Catherine would be the next victim, just like her father. When the elevator reached its floor, Cold fluorescent lights washed over his face, revealing deep lines carved by exhaustion. Ethan paused for a second, his hands clenching instinctively. The air around him felt heavy dense. He sensed something. Everyone on that rooftop had missed Catherine's joke was not a joke. It was the opening signal of a coming storm, and this time he could not avoid it. Because if he did nothing, she would die. And that death would not be an accident. It had been arranged. Ethan drew a long breath, opened his eyes, and stepped into the dim hallway leading to the 12th floor, the light fading with each step. A new chapter had begun, one he never expected to pull him back into the sky he had sworn to abandon forever. But he knew whether he wanted it or not, fate was calling his name. And he had to answer. Because sometimes the person deemed lowest is the only one who can see the storm before it hits. Ethan Cole pushed the cleaning cart into the 12th floor hallway, where the grey-white lights made everything look like a cold documentary about forgotten souls. But his mind had no room for the smell of chemicals, the stains on the floor, or the steady hum of a photocopier behind some office door. All he heard was the imagined rotor, still spinning in his ears, a sound that had never left him since Afghanistan. It dragged him back to the wreck of a downed helicopter, to the sight of an innocent family bleeding on the ground, and to the hands that had fired at the wrong target. Every night the past refused to stay buried. And tonight it broke through every layer of defense he had, especially when the image of the Sikorsky reflected Catherine's arrogant gaze, a gaze hiding something she didn't know. Death had touched her father, and it was reaching for her. Ethan bent down to pick up a fallen water bottle from the vending machine, but his eyes stopped on a smear of oil near the edge of the carpet, pale red like old blood. It was not elevator lubricant, nor anything used in office machinery. It was the kind he had seen hundreds of times, hydraulic fluid for helicopters, the type that turned red when contaminated or chemically altered. Why was it here? Why near the emergency exit, alongside a smear that looked like something heavy had been dragged? Why today of all days, the same day, Catherine taunted him to fly that aircraft, the same day the Sikorsky had been inspected, by none other than Chief Financial Officer Brian Mercer. Ethan studied the stain carefully, his heartbeat tightening. Everything was aligning piece by piece, and each piece led to a single conclusion: no accident is ever random. Back at the cart, he grabbed a cloth, but instead of wiping the fluid, he touched it lightly with his fingertip, and the familiar sticky texture froze his hand. There was no doubt. Someone had tampered with the helicopter. Someone wanted Catherine to die like Richard Hale. But why? Who gained anything? Who had the power to manipulate maintenance logs? As he sank deeper into these thoughts, a gentle voice rose behind him. Working the night shift again, Ethan Laura Stevens appeared, clutching a thick stack of files to her chest, her tired eyes honest as always. She was the least performative person at Aerodyne, and the only one who routinely spoke to Ethan like a human being. He nodded, trying to mask the tension flooding his body. Every night feels the same. Laura offered a sad smile, but her gaze flickered when she noticed the oil stain on the floor. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then hesitated, shifting awkwardly to another topic. Catherine gave you a hard time again, didn't she? Ethan stayed silent, not because he refused to speak, but because part of him feared that saying the truth out loud would make it real. Another part wanted to say he had seen what no one else bothered to see. But Laura spoke first. You know, she whispered, ever since Richard died, Everything in this company feels off. Strange expenses, sudden personnel changes, and Brian, he's not the same anymore. She paused, as if afraid someone might overhear. Ethan, be careful. He looked at her, but before he could ask anything, Catherine stepped out of the conference room, her eyes sharp like polished steel. Ethan saw in them not just arrogance, but a faint mist of fear she never admitted. Catherine never exposed vulnerability. Yet tonight her hands trembled slightly as she closed a file in front of Brian. She sensed the company fracturing. She sensed she was being pushed into a battlefield, but she did not know who held the weapon. Brian stood behind her, gripping a whiskey glass that shook almost imperceptibly. He tried to appear composed, but Ethan, who had seen too many men, moments from the collapse on the battlefield, recognized hidden panic instantly. Brian was covering something big. "Why are you still here?" Catherine snapped when she noticed Ethan near the meeting area. "Do you not know how to stay away from places meant for people with authority?" Ethan tightened his hold on the mop handle. She believed power was a fortress, not realizing it was nothing more than a fragile net. "Just doing my job," he said, his voice so calm it made Catherine lose her composure for a split second. She hated that calmness. It made her feel small even while standing at the top of the hierarchy. Brian cut in, desperate to shift the mood. "Catherine, we need to discuss the Boston contract on the 16th. But before they stepped into the conference room, something froze Ethan's blood. On the corner of Catherine's file, he saw the helicopter maintenance sheet, the one showing flight hours off by nearly 300 compared to the actual logs. Only senior technicians or high-level executives could manipulate such data, which meant Richard's crash had not been an accident. Ethan's throat tightened. The hallway air felt thick like it carried the residue of gunpowder. The familiar sensation before a deadly mission washed over him. Except this time was different. He was not a combat pilot. He was a janitor, powerless, voiceless, someone no one would believe. Yet he was the only one who saw the truth. And the truth was screaming that very soon Catherine would take off in the same trap someone had set, and she would fall from the sky the way her father did. Ethan looked at Catherine one last time before pushing his cart away, and he knew, despite her insults, despite her treating him like nothing, he could not let her die. Not because she deserved saving, but because Richard Hale, the man who trusted him, once the man who gave him a second chance, did not deserve to be betrayed by the death of his daughter. And Ethan always paid his debts, no matter the cost. That night, the Aerodyne Tower darkened into a cold block of steel, rising over Seattle like a massive creature guarding secrets no one dared to touch. When the clock struck 1 in the morning, Ethan Cole began his cleaning shift as usual, yet every step felt unusually heavy, as if the floor itself were trying to hold him back, refusing to let him walk any closer to a truth he was never meant to uncover. But the mind of a pilot who had survived gunfire and firestorms was not easily stopped. The more fear pressed in, the more he had to move forward. He passed by Catherine Hale's glass office, where the lights were still on, casting a warm glow across helicopter schematics, financial reports, and all the buried pain she was fighting to keep hidden. Through the glass, Ethan saw her bent over her desk, both hands pressed to her temples, her shoulders trembling, not from fear, but from pressure that had been weighing on her far too long. She believed she was fighting this war alone, unaware that the darkness was coming from the person she trusted most. Ethan paused for a few seconds, his chest tightening, because that image dragged him back to nights he had spent alone in a military tent in Afghanistan, hands shaking, haunted by the explosion that had shattered nearly everything in him that could still feel whole. They came from different worlds, but their deepest wounds were the same, both alone on their own battlefields. He kept walking. He reached the maintenance department where the flickering green lights looked like the dying breath of a machine on its last hours. There, Ethan found the original maintenance records for the Sikorsky S-76, the real paper logs that no one could alter without leaving a trace. When he flipped to the final page, his heart dropped straight to the floor. The recorded flight hours were 1,247. But in the digital log Catherine had on her desk, the number had been reduced to 981. Nearly 300 hours erased. Someone wanted the aircraft to look healthier than it was. Someone had altered the logs, and someone had successfully murdered Richard Hale using those falsified numbers. Ethan closed the file, but his palms were drenched in sweat. The truth was sharpening by the second, slicing through every defensive wall he had built during 3 years disguised as a janitor. As he was putting the document away, a faint noise in the hallway made his heart jolt. He ducked behind a storage cabinet. Footsteps echoed in steady, cold strikes, tightening the air with each step. Brian Mercer entered, jacket unbuttoned tie, crook at his face, gaunt like a man who had not slept in weeks. He did not see Ethan, hidden in the dark. Brian pulled out his phone, his voice shaking. I know, the deadline is the 16th, but I need more time. They told me I cannot fail them. They said if Catherine survives the flight, they will. Ethan heard him swallow hard. I will not let them touch my daughter. She is only 8. Brian braced himself against the desk, gasping like someone on the verge of collapse. Richard, I didn't kill him. I just didn't stop it. I had no choice. He broke down in tears, the kind of tears that belonged to a man who had already sold his soul. Ethan stood frozen. He had heard pleas like this before. On the battlefield, enemy soldiers sometimes wept the same way. Desperate men. Men cornered with nowhere to run. But desperation was never an excuse for murder. Brian wiped his tears, lifted his head, and his next words cut the air like a blade. The helicopter, I did exactly what they asked. The oil was replaced. The system was adjusted. It will lock up at 10,000 feet. Quick clean. No suspicion. Brian collapsed into a chair. I just need it done. Done and over. Ethan watched him from the shadows, fury rushing through him like a flood straining against the walls of his chest. Not fury for Catherine. Fury for the monsters who exploited a father's fear to turn him into a weapon. Fury for Richard Hale, the man who had brought Ethan into Aerodyne as a way of giving him a second chance at life. He could not allow Richard's daughter to die the same way. He could not allow Brian to drag more innocent lives into the abyss with him. When Brian finally left the room, Ethan let out the breath he had been holding. He pressed a hand to his chest, feeling his heartbeat pounding like it wanted to break out. The sensation was unmistakable, the feeling of stepping once more onto a battlefield. He knew. From the moment he heard Brian whisper 10,000 feet, he was no longer a janitor. He was a combat pilot again. The only man who knew the Sikorsky was going to fall. The only man who could alter the outcome. But before he acted, he needed the whole truth. He used the key Laura had given him earlier and headed straight to Richard Hale's private floor. The office had been sealed since the day Richard died. The door opened with a soft scrape, releasing the scent of aged leather and old papers. Moonlight spilled across the desk, coating everything in a pale silver glow. Ethan stepped inside like stepping into someone's soul. He opened drawers, searched through documents, and at last found what he needed, a USB drive hidden inside a hollow notebook. Scrawled in Richard's handwriting were the words, "If I die, the person holding this USB must be someone I trust completely." Inside the USB was a special insurance contract, stating that if Catherine died, Brian would receive $100 million. The signing date was 2 weeks before Richard's death. Richard knew. He knew someone wanted his daughter dead. He hired Ethan to protect her, but never had the chance to tell him the truth. Ethan stood in the darkness for a long time, not because he was afraid, because he understood he could no longer run. He slid the USB into his pocket and left the room. The hallway stretched out before him, like a runway leading toward the final mission of his life. Except this time he was not allowed to fail. If Catherine died, another life would be stolen. And if he let that happen again, a part of him would die with her. In the same instant, Ethan understood the storm had truly begun, and he was standing at its very center, just like every time before. But this time, he was not fighting for the military. He was fighting for redemption, and for a woman unaware that her life was now resting in the hands of the man she had crushed earlier with her own arrogance. The next morning, Seattle lay shrouded in a thin mist, like a veil hiding truths no one wanted to face yet. To Ethan Cole, it felt like a warning that what lurked in the shadows was about to tear through the ground and rise. He had barely slept, his mind still spinning from Brian's call the night before, from Richard Hale's USB ticking like a time bomb in his jacket pocket, and from the image of Catherine Hale, proud yet fragile, standing on the edge of life and death she believed she controlled. When Ethan stepped into the Aerodyne lobby, everything seemed too bright, too loud, too alive compared to the chaos churning inside him. The managers had gathered in the center for an internal meeting, and Catherine, in her charcoal-gray suit, stood at the center, like an unshakable tower. Her smile was sharp as a blade, honed by pressure. Pride and fear never admitted. Ethan understood it. Survivors often hide fear beneath armor no one can penetrate. He had done it, and so had Catherine. But armor could not stop the bullets he had seen. He passed through the manager's cluster trying to blend in, but Catherine's gaze caught him like a laser. Cleaning still not finished, her voice rang across the lobby, drawing every eye to him. "Or are you just free to eavesdrop on company plans?" Ethan did not reply, but the laughter from behind transformed the air into an execution chamber, and he was the one tied to the chair. Catherine carried a coffee cup from a marketing director, then approached slowly, her eyes fixed on him, like a monarch preparing to teach an unruly servant a lesson. "Let me show you," she lifted the coffee, "the difference between clean and dirty." She slammed it onto the marble floor he had polished that morning. Coffee splashed hot steam, rising like a slap to the face. The lobby went silent for a heartbeat before erupting into murmurs. A few pulled out phones to record, a few smirked, waiting to see Ethan collapse like a scolded dog. Catherine crossed her arms. "Clean it up or get out of the company." Every word reverberated from ceiling to floor, icy enough to nearly freeze the air. Ethan looked at the coffee puddle, then at the eyes waiting for him to kneel. His heart pounded, not from shame, but from memories of Afghanistan stabbing into his chest, rotor blades spinning chaotically, children crying him, screaming into a radio while no one listened. There he could save no one. Here he had to save someone who had pushed him to the bottom. He carefully set down the mop, then knelt. The sound of his knees hitting the marble echoed dryly, prolonging like warning shots, fired into the air. A live stream pinged somewhere in the crowd. A caption appeared: CEO humiliates, janitor pinnacle of power or abyss of humanity. Yet Catherine stood rigid, unaware that the world had slowed around her. In that instant, Ethan saw the truth clearly. She was not doing this to torment him. She was doing it because there was nothing left to control but her power. Nothing to keep herself from collapsing except stepping on others to remain standing. Someone about to die always acts that way without knowing it. As Ethan scrubbed, Brian's voice floated down from the upper floor, freezing him, mid-motion, 16th. On schedule. Don't worry, they won't suspect. Ethan leapt to his feet. Though soft, each word struck like a blade in his ears. No one else heard, but with his battlefield-trained ears, every fragment of sound became data. Brian pushed open the conference room door, clothes neat but face as pale as someone crossing the gates of hell. When Brian's and Ethan's eyes met, the moment was too brief to measure, yet enough for Ethan to know Brian understood he had heard. Brian swallowed hard and turned his gait off balance. Ethan clenched his fists. This was no longer speculation. This was a crime. Ethan returned to finish wiping the coffee when a light hand touched his shoulder. Laura. She placed a small key in his palm, squeezing gently as she let it fall into his calloused hand. Richard's office, she whispered tonight. Then she stepped back, avoiding Catherine's sweeping gaze across the lobby like a blade. For a moment, Ethan felt the rhythm of life shift direction. He, a man who had seemed to have left the sky forever, was about to plunge headfirst into a mission he knew well, either save Catherine or die alongside the secret she carried. At the end of the meeting, as the crowd dispersed, Catherine strode past him, her heels striking the floor with crisp, cold taps. "Next time I see you late," she said, without looking at him. "I won't just spill coffee." Ethan stood tall, watching her silhouette enter the elevator. Her shoulders no longer trembled like last night. She was trying to appear stronger than today, because she knew the company's pressure, the Boston contract, her father's legacy, was trying to devour her, piece by piece. But she did not know there was something greater waiting for her in the sky, a perfectly engineered assassination. When the elevator doors closed, Ethan saw his own reflection in the glass, a man in a worn janitor's uniform, yet in his eyes burned the fire he had thought long extinguished. He knew what he had to do, and he knew he would do it. Some battles we choose, and some battles choose us. This time the battle had chosen Ethan, and he could no longer retreat. Ethan Cole stepped into Richard Hale's old office, where everything remained untouched since the powerful man had died, the scent of leather and aged paper hanging in the air. Moonlight streaming through the large windows, casting silver light across flight charts and financial files, as if telling an unfinished story. He opened each drawer, rifled through every folder, flipped each page with hands that trembled slightly, but were sure his mind scanning every detail like a radar. Finally, he found a hollow notebook, carefully hidden in a drawer by Richard, a small USB, lying motionless inside its silver gleam, reflecting the moonlight like a warning. Ethan lifted the USB and read Richard's scrawled words. "If I die, the person holding this USB must be someone I trust absolutely." His heart raced, battlefield memories flooding back every moment in Afghanistan, replaying the explosions, helicopter rotors, the screams of children he had mistakenly targeted, all blending with the present to make his skin crawl. He inserted the USB into a computer files, appearing emergency insurance contracts, stating that if Catherine Hale died on the upcoming flight, Brian Mercer would receive $100 million, signed 2 weeks before Richard's death, irrefutable proof. Every piece fit together like a hellish puzzle: the sabotaged helicopter, Brian under the control of the mafia, Catherine about to take off unaware, and Ethan standing alone between life and death. He inhaled deeply, shoulders tense. The world fell silent, as if frozen, only the wind outside the window whistling through the frame. Ethan picked up a leftover coffee cup from the office, inhaling the faint, burnt scent, remembering sleepless nights, sleeping pills, screams in dreams, and Richard's silent face as he gave him a second chance at life. He knew there was no turning back. He had to act. Stepping out of the office, Ethan moved silently, pausing before the helicopter eyes, scanning every detail: the rotor, the flight hour meters, the electronic panel. He opened the USB and noted every step required. The information was clear: the hydraulic fluid had been tampered with, designed to lock up at 10,000 feet. If Catherine took off unaware, death would occur swiftly, perfectly as programmed. Ethan bent down, placing a fingertip on the control panel, feeling the cold metal, visualizing exactly how the aircraft would respond. A surge of fear and responsibility weighed on him, heavy enough to feel unbearable. Yet he knew this was the moment to prove that all his skills, experience, and life or death lessons from the battlefield mattered. He retrieved a military-grade coin and placed it beside the USB, emphasizing that if Catherine saw it, she would follow the emergency instructions. Ethan double-checked every step: fluid dilution procedures, for hydraulic failure, emergency landing instructions. Each action was meticulously calculated, every second a matter of life. He donned his helmet, taking a long breath, as if drawing strength from the past to face the present. His steps quickened as he entered the cockpit, checking the panel's hands on the controls, feeling every button, every switch. He imagined Catherine holding the yoke, reading the instruments. And if she followed the instructions precisely, she would survive. If not, everything would end. His heart raced, yet his gaze remained calm, his inner voice resounding. Failure is not an option. Not this time. He placed the USB and coin on the co-pilot seat, ensuring Catherine would see them. Ethan pulled out his phone and sent a quick message to Laura Stevens. "Everything is ready. Time to act." Laura responded with a nod in the shadows, her eyes glinting with tension and resolve. Ethan stepped out of the cockpit, paused for a few seconds, staring at the silent helicopter, imagining Catherine entering in a few days, knowing that every detail from gauges to rotor to pilot seat could decide her fate. He took a deep breath, as if inhaling Richard Hale's responsibility, Catherine's survival, and the lives of innocents who could be caught in the plot. His steps were careful down the maintenance elevator heartbeat, syncing with the engine hum outside each step, a bridge between death and survival. No way back. No reason to hesitate. Ethan knew that even if humiliated, belittled, deemed insignificant, he was now the only one who could save her. He closed his eyes for a moment, envisioning Catherine taking off, managing the faulty hydraulics, every rotor spin, every throttle notch, and landing safely. The tension, the anxiety, the worry surged through him like electricity, raising goosebumps and pounding his heart, yet igniting a flame of life. Ethan stood there between the helicopter cabin and the building corridor, knowing that from this moment on, no one but him could alter the outcome. He had prepared everything: evidence, instructions, tools, and himself. The storm was coming, and he was the only one standing in its path. Not to win, not for revenge, but to save a life. Not because Catherine deserved it, but because of Richard's promise, and everything Ethan had survived to see and protect. Looking up at the night sky through the window, the faintly twinkling stars, Ethan knew the coming days would decide everything: who lived, who died, and who truly stood firm amid power and crime. He lifted his foot, steady, moving toward the actions that would change the future for all, because this time no one could afford to fail. The night was thick with fog over the Aerodyne Tower, each hallway and window pane reflecting the dim light, as if whispering secrets only Ethan Cole could hear. He stood silently before the helicopter eyes, scanning every detail: the rotor, the control panels, the pilot seat, the numbers on the maintenance logs that Brian Mercer had deliberately falsified. In his hands were the USB and the military-grade coin, his heartbeat racing every breath, blending with the whistling wind through the rooftop, as a reminder that every second counted. Ethan bent down, checked the hydraulic fluid, and realized it was no longer original, replaced with a compound that would solidify at 10,000 feet. He closed his eyes for a moment, recalling nights in Afghanistan, hours spent on the knife's edge between life and death, mistakes he had carried for a lifetime. But unlike the battlefield this time, he was not deceived by orders. This time, he was in control, the only one holding life and death in his hands. Ethan carefully diluted the fluid milliliter by milliliter, not enough to fully restore the helicopter, but enough to delay the moment of failure. He knew that at extreme altitude, Catherine would have no chance to react, but at the right height, she could land safely if she followed the instructions. He wrote out each step of the emergency procedure, from detecting hydraulic pressure drops to controlling the rotor and performing auto-rotation landings, each word like a scream in the night, a reminder that life was counting down. Ethan placed the USB and the coin on the co-pilot seat, ensuring Catherine would see them and follow the instructions. He remembered how Richard Hale had carefully tucked notes into files, instructing him to keep them hidden to protect his daughter. He knew this mission was no longer a test of skill or experience, but a challenge of intellect, composure, and the courage he had accumulated over a lifetime. He double-checked all the switches' valves, feeling every vibration of the machine, as if reading its pulse, envisioning Catherine entering the cabin, the pressure rising as she noticed something wrong, but not panicking, because the instructions were right in front of her. Meanwhile, Brian Mercer was still entangled with the mafia, his phone buzzing incessantly, heart racing, knowing his plan was being monitored. Ethan stepped back into the shadows, eyes fixed on the office door, every motion precise as a machine, leaving no trace, yet each detail carrying the weight of life and death. He stepped out of the helicopter cabin, moving like a ghost through the corridor, leading to Richard's office, checking the files and instructions one last time. A cold gust blew through, ruffling his clothes, and in that moment he imagined Catherine taking off the helicopter, trembling the rotor, spinning like the call of death. Yet if she followed his guidance, all would be safe. He exhaled, feeling the tension, each decision slicing through him like a sharp blade, yet without regret. Because this time, he was fighting not just for himself or for Richard, but for the life of the woman who had once humiliated him. He recalled Catherine's gaze on the rooftop, unaware that the man she had just dismissed was a combat pilot who had survived the most harrowing storms, the man now holding life and death in his hands. Ethan took a step forward into the technical cabin, one final time checking the rotor, the controls, every button, every switch, his heartbeat syncing with the imagined rotor sound. He pictured Catherine reading the instructions, every step observed by his eyes, and if she followed them, she would survive. If not, the outcome would be a perfectly executed death, swift and unquestionable. Ethan paused, eyes closed, sensing his entire body like a living radar. Every sense, heightened every sound and vibration, vital data. He glanced at the clock, time, moving slowly as if to emphasize every precious second. He stepped out into the corridor, opened the maintenance elevator door, each step calculating every possibility: speed, timing, flight angle, hydraulic pressure, Catherine's ability to react. Everything was meticulously accounted for, but one crucial variable remained: could she remain calm under pressure? He closed his eyes, imagining her expression when she saw the military coin on the co-pilot seat, the USB with the instructions, and for the first time in 3 years, all his battlefield memories, his trauma, his humiliation at Aerodyne, converged into a single goal: keeping Catherine alive. Ethan stood silently staring at the helicopter cabin, imagining her takeoff rotor, spinning the helicopter, shaking, but with the instructions he had prepared, she would respond in time. Everything moved in slow motion, yet he knew that one small mistake, one wrong input, and a life would end. He took a deep breath, eyes closed, feeling every sound, every light, every imagined scent of burning machinery, and a resolve surged within him. This time, no one could interfere with his mission. This time, Ethan Cole was the guardian of life, the only shield between survival and death, and he would not step back, hesitate, or fail. He stepped out of the technical cabin, eyes flashing with determination, each step down the corridor, like the beat of an alarm, and for the first time in years, Ethan knew the storm had truly begun, and he stood at its very center, with everything necessary to save Catherine Hale. 2 nights before, the 16th, Seattle's sky was buried beneath a thick blanket of clouds, smothering the city lights, making the Aerodyne Tower look like a colossal machine, hiding the breath of some lurking demon. Ethan Cole stood alone in the rooftop technical room, the Sikorsky S-76 lying silent like a sleeping beast, yet he knew that inside it, a meticulously prepared death trap awaited to end Catherine Hale's life. No laughter, no insults, no scornful gazes. Everything swallowed by darkness, leaving only the steady, sharp countdown of his heartbeat. Ethan opened the control panel, his hands moving as though he had never left the sky, reading every button, every wire, every pressure valve, with the instinct of someone who had survived hundreds of combat flight hours. When he opened the hydraulic compartment, the chemical smell hit him sharply. This was not standard fluid. It was a low, viscosity, heat-sensitive compound, exactly the type that would solidify once the helicopter reached 10,000 feet. Ethan visualized the hydraulics freezing the rotor, losing lift, the helicopter plummeting, Catherine screaming into the radio while no one could hear her. Death would arrive in an instant. He inhaled deeply, retrieved the standard hydraulic fluid he had prepared, adding it drop by drop to delay the freezing point, lowering the failure altitude just enough for Catherine to have a chance to survive. A dangerous, risky adjustment, but the only choice. He knew that if he replaced it entirely, Brian would notice. If he left it as is, Catherine would die without a chance. So this was the only path, a razor's edge between life and death, that he had to walk as if on a tightrope above an abyss. Once the new fluid blended with the old, Ethan began writing the emergency instructions. Short, sharp commands, clear as battlefield orders. Reduce, lift, maintain. Rotor 97 to 102%. Prepare for auto-rotation. Locate landing zone at left visual quadrant. His hand trembled slightly, but the writing remained precise and straight, each stroke a vow to save Catherine, even though she had never regarded him as human. Ethan folded the instructions, tucked them on the co-pilot seat, then retrieved his Night Stalker's honor coin from his pocket, the one he had carried since leaving the battlefield, the only reminder that he had once been a hero before becoming the janitor, humiliated under dozens of indifferent eyes. He placed the coin atop the paper like an anchor, forcing Catherine to pause and absorb every detail. If she read it, she would live. If not, everything would end. Ethan started the system once, listening to the engine hum beneath his feet, the sound rippling through his chest as terrifying memories surfaced: the scorched rotors, the frantic screams of the family he had once accidentally targeted comrades, calling each other amid the smoke and fire of Fallujah. Sweat ran down his neck, his body taut as a drawn bow. But Ethan opened his eyes, hands gripping the controls, whispering to himself, "Not another life. Not from my mistakes. Not because of them." He powered down, stepping out of the cockpit. In the dark corridor, his phone vibrated an unknown number. A distorted voice came through. "We know you entered Richard's office. Stop, or your Fallujah records go to the company, to the press, to the courts. You will lose everything." Ethan gripped the phone so tightly, his knuckles turned white. The tremor lasted a few seconds, then faded. "I've already lost everything," he whispered, "so there's nothing left for you to take." He ended the call. No hesitation, no fear. He left the rooftop, descended to the security room to grab a backup radio, then returned to the storage room to inspect emergency exits, in case a quick escape became necessary. Every step was calculated. He was not reckless. He was prepared. He was not just trying to save Catherine, he was preparing to face those who would try to kill him if their plan failed. As Ethan returned to the technical floor, Brian Mercer appeared at the end of the corridor, staggering, breathless phone pressed to his ear. His voice shook. "I've done it. No turning back. On the 16th, she goes up in the helicopter. You will have the money. Please, please, spare my daughter." Ethan froze, hidden in the shadows, watching Brian like someone sliding toward the abyss he himself had dug. Part of Ethan wanted to pity him. Another part wanted to grab him by the collar and drag him into the light to face the crime he had created. But not now. Every action from this moment had to be precise, like flying a helicopter through a storm. He left before Brian could see him, heart heavy as stone. He reached his old locker on the 10th floor, sat on the broken chair, pulled out his phone, dialing a number he had not dared call in 3 years, the number of Colonel Maddox, his former commanding officer. He did not call. There was no time. Instead, he began recording the entire conversation, the whole plan, the entire conspiracy, the final evidence he would need when everything exploded. And it would explode. Somehow he knew it. When the clock struck 3 a.m., Ethan stood looking at himself in the mirror, the worn face, bloodshot eyes, sweat-matted hair, and the image of a man facing his final battle. Yet in those eyes, something that had never gone out flared brightly resolve. He wiped his face, straightened his uniform, and whispered to himself, "On the 16th, I will stand between death and her." And he stepped out, as if entering the battlefield, once again, not to shoot, but to save. Not to survive, but to redeem. And he knew clearly the architect of this conspiracy, the one who wanted to kill Catherine Hale, the one who had killed Richard Hale. All would soon appear before him. When the sun rose, an entirely new war would begin, and Ethan Cole was ready. On the 16th, Seattle's sky was crystal clear, not a cloud in sight, yet the tension, made the air feel heavy like poisonous fog. The Sikorsky S-76 lay silent on the rooftop, its blades gleaming in the early sunlight. Catherine Hale stepped out of the elevator, her flight suit, fitting perfectly heels, striking the concrete eyes, confident yet strangely trembling hands, gripping the yoke as if touching fate itself. Ethan Cole stood behind, watching through the narrow window, heartbeat racing face, as cold as ice hands, gripping the folded emergency instructions on the co-pilot seat, the military coin placed atop them, the only signal for Catherine to read every word if she wanted to survive. Catherine stepped into the cockpit, slowly, eyes scanning the instructions, glancing at the coin, her gaze freezing as she realized the seriousness in each line, each command, and for the first time in her life, she had to follow the person she had just humiliated. Ethan held his breath, watching every movement heartbeat, syncing with the imagined rotor, envisioning the hydraulics freezing the helicopter, losing lift. Catherine panicking, but he had prepared, calculated every possibility to give her a chance to react. She took off rotor spinning steadily, wind hitting her face, eyes wide, focused hands, gripping the yoke tightly, following each step Ethan had written. Reducing lift, maintaining rotor, 97 to 102% checking systems following auto-rotation procedures, locating a safe landing zone. The helicopter shook as hydraulic pressure gradually dropped. Catherine remained calm, following the instructions, eyes fixed on the panel, each throttle adjustment, each slight turn precise like a musical score. Ethan had composed every note crucial for survival. Meanwhile, Brian Mercer stood in his office below phone, pressed to his ear, sweat dripping from his temple voice, trembling, "No, she's alive." Panic evident in every gesture, hands clenching the phone, too afraid to breathe. Ethan, standing silently in the shadows, monitored the radar at the control room heartbeat, like a battlefield drum, every foot, every second calculated. Catherine descended the system, beginning automatic deceleration, preparing for the final flare to touch down safely, all dependent on her following the instructions precisely. The sky was bright blue. The helicopter shaking, Catherine spoke into the radio voice, trembling but resolute. "Tower, this is Aerodyne. 1 hydraulic pressure. Dropping, executing emergency landing per instructions." Sarah Stevens in the control room held her hand tightly, eyes glued to the screen, watching Brian slump in his chair, unable to believe what she was seeing. Every number, every alert showing his plan had failed. The helicopter continued descending, Catherine controlling the rotor, executing the flare at 40 feet, the ground approaching, and with each passing second, Ethan felt his heart beat in unison with hers, sensing every vibration of the machine, every tense sound of the wind, every rotor strike, every minor action determining her life. Finally, the helicopter touched down. Wheels landing gently, Catherine exhaled tension melting from her face, sweat streaming down her forehead, yet she remained upright, hands on the yoke eyes, meeting Ethan's through the glass, recognizing the man who had just saved her life, the man she had once dismissed, the only person who fully understood the conspiracy stalking her. Ethan stepped out, face cold, as steel each footfall on the concrete, heavy yet deliberate, letting Catherine recognize his presence. Not a janitor, not an anonymous shadow, but the guardian of life, the one controlling a situation no one else could. Catherine bent down, picking up the coin, and the instructions from the co-pilot seat, eyes tense and awed, realizing that the person she had humiliated, forced to kneel before everyone, was the only one capable of saving her. In that moment, regret washed over her, mingled with deep gratitude. Ethan said nothing, staring into Catherine's eyes, breathing steady expression, calm yet with absolute vigilance in his gaze, knowing any lapse could return everything to hell. Catherine activated the radio continuously, monitoring the panel following each instruction. The helicopter, shaking but stable, she maintained calm feeling, every turn of the yoke, every vibration, every hydraulic pressure, fluctuation, every gust testing her patience and skill. Ethan stood outside, watching the radar screen, sweat beading his forehead, hand gripping a cold coffee cup, recalling the hours of combat in Afghanistan, the explosions, the screams. Yet this time, he fought not for himself, but for another life. And finally, the helicopter landed safely, wheels touching the ground gently. Catherine exhaling, sweat-streaming eyes, fixed on Ethan, realizing he was no longer a janitor, but the hero in the shadows, who had changed her fate, the one who had turned a plot to kill her into a survival triumph. In that instant, Seattle lay silent, only distant rotor sounds fading, but the story of courage, resolve, and standing between life and death had begun to resonate in both their hearts, like a drum marking a new era of power, responsibility, and trust, where the most underestimated could become a savior, where life and death were separated by a hair's breadth, and where Ethan Cole, a man who had survived hell itself, now stood in the light, knowing he had completed the mission of his life, even as sweat calloused hands and painful memories lingered, reminding him that true courage is not the absence of fear, but acting despite fear to protect another. Immediately after Catherine Hale landed safely, the rotor noise gradually faded. She stood in the cabin, hands still gripping the yoke heart, pounding, sweat streaming down her forehead, yet her eyes shone brightly as she looked down at Ethan Cole, standing silently, his shadow flickering in the early morning light. For the first time she realized that the man she had once humiliated, the one she had dismissed and forced to kneel before the entire company, was the person who had just saved her life, the only one who had controlled the entire situation from the shadows. Ethan said nothing yet. His gaze conveyed a clear message. I did everything possible for you to survive. You must follow every step I prepared. Catherine exhaled slowly, drawing in a deep breath to steady herself, taking the instructions and the coin from the co-pilot seat. Every line, every directive came alive, each detail a command for survival she could not afford to miss, and as she read carefully, her eyes widened, realizing the absolute precision, the cold professionalism she had never expected from the man she had considered inferior. Ethan stepped out of the shadows, each footfall deliberate on the concrete floor, his worn janitor uniform no longer hiding the steel in his eyes, and for the first time, Catherine saw him not as a janitor, not as an anonymous shadow, but as a hero forged in war, a Night Stalker's special operations pilot with over 1,500 combat flight hours, who had survived Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria, and had faced death so many times that his instincts alone could sense danger in any situation. Laura Stevens stepped forward, offering Ethan a heavy, anxious but respectful smile, knowing everything he had done, every preparation, every drop of sweat, every decision. And now the truth about him was no longer a secret. When Ethan drew the USB from his jacket and powered up his laptop, every file opened special insurance contracts, sabotage reports, and the assassination plan for Catherine, orchestrated by Brian Mercer and the Mafia. Each line bold a stark warning, revealing one undeniable truth. Ethan was the only person Richard Hale had trusted to protect his daughter, trained and prepared to confront any conspiracy, yet he had never known that the real test of his mission would be measured in survival, as it had been today. Catherine read each line, every detail. Eyes wide, hands trembling slightly, but holding the USB tightly, heart-racing breath shallow, realizing her life entirely rested in the hands of the man she had just crushed with her arrogance. And for the first time, she felt deep remorse, not just for bowing, kneeling, or the insults, but for misjudging a man who had held her life in his hands, silently enduring, observing everything, and now stood before her eyes, cold, yet filled with responsibility. Ethan said nothing, simply sitting, letting Catherine realize, letting everything become clear to her. He was the hero in the shadows, the protector, the one who had saved her from a meticulously planned death. Catherine swallowed, throat tight, understanding the entire plan, the full conspiracy, and the truth about Ethan. She had seen him kneel before the crowd, believing it was humiliation, when in reality he had been silently protecting her. Every memory of shame, every contemptuous glance, every laugh from the company staff suddenly weighed heavy, settling like stones on her chest. Ethan rose, slowly, eyes never leaving Catherine. Face calm, yet his gaze full of courage and responsibility, and Catherine knew she would never forget this moment, never again underestimate a person. Sarah Stevens stepped forward, opening the files Richard Hale had left behind. Instructions, letters all made clear. Richard had prepared, everything had foreseen. The future had placed absolute trust in Ethan, and Ethan had never known that his employer was truly Richard. She handed everything to Catherine, showing her the full extent of Brian's conspiracy, the mafia's greed, and the assassination plan that Ethan had just thwarted. Catherine stood motionless, eyes fixed on each line, each image, realizing that Ethan had protected her, not only with skill and intelligence, but with a life forged through battles, with pain, torment, and unshakable loyalty. She turned to him, eyes glistening, realizing for the first time in her life that the person she had humiliated, the one she had looked down upon, was the only one worthy of her respect, the only one she could truly feel gratitude toward. Ethan nodded slightly, a simple gesture, wordless, yet enough for Catherine to understand that everything had been prepared, every plot had been neutralized, and she stood between life and death because of him. And in that moment, she knew that from now on, every judgment she made about people power and courage would be entirely different. Sunlight streamed through the window, highlighting her flight suit, Ethan's worn vest, and on the floor everything fell silent, somber, as if all of Aerodyne and the Seattle sky were witnessing the moment the truth was revealed, the moment Catherine Hale first understood that the one she had once considered lowly standing at the edge was the hero in the shadows, the person who had saved her life, and Ethan Cole was no longer just a janitor, but a man bearing the ultimate responsibility of the company and of her life. And for the first time, she bowed not from shame, but from profound gratitude, knowing that everything that had transpired proved one thing. Sometimes the person you underestimate the most is the one who will save you from the storm you never saw coming. A few days after Catherine Hale landed safely, the helicopter gone, the rotor sounds faded. The entire Aerodyne tower lay in silence, as if having weathered an unprecedented storm. Catherine stood before all the staff, her eyes reflecting determination, mixed with remorse, her voice echoing across the lobby. From today, every standard in this company will change. Everyone was silent, stunned, and curious. No one dared move, only watching Catherine, the woman they had once feared, the one who had forced a janitor to kneel before them now, standing tall shoulders, broad eyes, deep, conveying that power is not meant to intimidate, but to protect. She looked at Ethan Cole, standing behind, still in his worn janitor uniform, his eyes calm but profound, and Catherine realized he was the one who had saved her, the one who had stood between death and protected her life, something she had never recognized before. Catherine drew a deep breath and continued. Starting today, all janitorial staff will receive full benefits, minimum wage of $30 an hour, educational support, and proper respect. Anyone who disrespects support staff will be terminated immediately. Murmurs swept the lobby. Some executives were impressed, others frowned, knowing that from now on things would be different. Catherine moved on to the next part, establishing the Richard Hale Fund to train PTSD, affected veteran pilots, helping them regain certifications and confidence to fly again. She looked at Ethan. You will oversee the fund directly. Everything depends on your judgment. Ethan nodded slightly, stepping forward as employees pulled out their phones, their eyes shifting from doubt to respect. Catherine handed him an envelope containing his final salary, plus 3 years of combat allowances, sent by Richard through shell companies, totaling around $300,000. But Ethan shook his head. I do not want it. It has always belonged to me from the start. Catherine smiled lightly, walking past each row of staff, explaining, You are promoted to Director of Flight Safety salary. $75,000. Full benefits, reporting directly to me. You no longer need to fly. Your mission is to teach, train, ensure every pilot is safe, detect all risks, protect lives, and PTSD does not weaken you. It gives you greater understanding of people. Ethan looked at the envelope, then at Catherine, his eyes flashing comprehension and peace. Sarah Stevens stepped forward, holding FBI files, all evidence on Brian Mercer, the Mafia, and the sabotage plots for Ethan to use and manage the fund effectively. Catherine lifted her head, addressing all staff. This is not charity. It is a necessity. Aerodyne has $800 million in military contracts. The Pentagon requires someone they trust to oversee safety. That person is Ethan. She looked into Ethan's eyes, smiling genuinely for the first time in months, her gaze softening, and the entire staff realized that from this day forward, the company would be different. People would be valued for who they are, not titles or skin color. Ethan walked through the crowd, employees bowing respectfully, those who had once mocked him, avoiding his gaze, some nodding subtly to acknowledge his courage and skill. Catherine handed him the military coin, symbolizing combat flight hours, emphasizing that he had overcome all challenges and now had the authority to protect others. She continued, voice strong. All employees dealing with psychological conditions, depression, anxiety, or trauma will receive full coverage, no limits, no questions, no discrimination. Applause rose, genuine, not perfunctory, a show of heartfelt admiration. Ethan looked at Catherine, his gaze softening. She looked back, realizing for the first time that she had misjudged a man, the one she had humiliated, forced to kneel before everyone, was the person who had saved her life, protected the company, and taught her a lesson in humility, responsibility, and respect. Everyone in the lobby saw Ethan no longer as a janitor, but as a living symbol of patience, courage, and intelligence, while Catherine, the once proud CEO, now learned to see others with her heart, not through power or status. The Richard Hale Fund began operating PTSD Affected veterans lined up on the rooftop, Ethan training them, Catherine learning to fly seriously, both looking up at the sky where her helicopter had once landed, in fear now a symbol of life, of rising after a fall of gratitude and true change. In the morning light, everything felt peaceful, yet the building, the city, and all Aerodyne staff knew that from now on, new values, new people, and understanding would shape the company, and Ethan Cole, once humiliated, now led as a beacon for all, while Catherine Hale, once arrogant, had learned that true strength comes not from power or title, but from seeing, protecting, and never judging by appearances. A new era began at Aerodyne, where courage, integrity, and the ability to save lives became the measure of value, and Ethan Cole, standing in the morning light, knew he had completed the mission of his life, while Catherine Hale, bowing to him, truly understood and felt gratitude for the first time. From the perspective of an expert in leadership and human psychology, the story of Catherine Hale and Ethan Cole reveals a profound truth. Power does not create a person, it only amplifies what already exists within. A CEO can be arrogant, a janitor can be underestimated, but when challenges arise, it is the ability to recognize human value, courage and intelligence that determines the outcome. Bravery, patience, and the capacity to protect others beyond status are what define true leadership. These experiences remind us never to judge anyone by appearances, titles, or current circumstances, because the person you underestimate today may be the one who saves you tomorrow. If this story inspires you, like the video to spread the message of courage and humanity, subscribe to follow more deeply engaging journeys, and comment the phrase, "See people," as a reminder that human worth is always deserving of respect, no matter who stands before you.